So fun and kindness. This actually, for me, can make or break a lot of our relationships. You don't have to be like falling off your chair laughing or high-fiving with your client, although sometimes that's fun. But generally, people should enjoy working together, and they shouldn't be trying to avoid each other. You don't have to be best friends, but you should not hate the person you're working with, because that makes life really difficult. Keeping a light atmosphere is also good, so it just helps people to connect better and not feel like there's so much heavy weight and stress in the project. So the fun atmosphere is really important. And with kindness, what I'm sort of referring to here is that people should wish the best for their teammates, both on the client side and on the agency side, and not just within the project, but also in their careers, so that this is part of their career, this is a project they're working on that's going to go in their portfolio, and you want this project to be successful for them, but you want them to also be able to progress. And then beyond that, in their personal life, because you just never know what people are dealing with outside of work. You know, they might have a family illness, or they might have some sort of emergency going on. They might not, but it's just important to be considerate and understanding so that they can perform their best while at work. So if someone gets sick and the timeline slips because you don't have resources to make up for time when someone's sick, just not getting angry about it, just being very kind and trying to help them to recover so that when they get back to work, we can get back to the timeline as soon as possible. So those are the different qualities, but I want to also go over some signs and symptoms of unhealthy relationships, because there's a lot of repetition in some of the behaviors that I've seen. Also, all of the slide titles are Prince songs or lyrics. Every single one.
That's awesome.
He's got like over 1,000 songs. And that's more stay. So threats and manipulation. You'll hear this sometimes from a disgruntled client saying like, hey, you know, there are other people out there I can work with. So the root cause of that is that they don't feel that they're receiving the quality of work or attention that they're paying for. So that's usually the cause. There might be another reason, but if it's not clear to you why they would be saying that, it's a good point to just ask. Sometimes you're already aware, but it's always good to just be like, hey, that's interesting. Like, what are you looking for that we're not giving you? It could be something as simple as a minor request that they've had multiple times, and it's just not something that you've remembered to do or not done well enough, and it's something that's really easy to fix. But in general, it's a bad idea to feed threatening behavior, because it sort of is a feedback loop where if you do something because they threaten you, they'll do it again to get whatever they want out of you. So, and it's also important that everybody wants to be a part of this relationship, which goes back to the cooperation part. So inform them that they're free to shop around, and if they feel that there's another agency that can better serve them, they're free to change vendors, and that's fine, and we understand. It's just really important that everybody wants to actually be together. Blaming. So you're making me look bad. You know, we wouldn't be like in this position if you'd done X. So the root cause here is usually the person that you're working with on the client side is not sufficiently empowered in either the project or within their organization to deal with the project decisions on their end or to own the decisions that are getting made. So this causes friction just because they have to answer to someone higher up that's not understanding where things are coming from. So the way to remedy this is to meet with the client's point of contact and their superior. So the person you're talking with and whoever is causing them or saying that they're not looking good or everything's looking bad. And just talk about what's going on and explain the process of how you got to where you are so that you can work out a solution with the superior so that maybe if they felt that it should have been done differently, that their opinion is taken into account. What'll happen is you'll say, hey, like, if you're actually the stakeholder for this project, or if you're actually wrangling the stakeholders for this project, maybe you should be our point of contact to the superior. And they'll often be like, oh, I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough time to commit to this, so I'm going to give the responsibility to the person. Because a lot of people who are the top level people just don't have time to deal with it, and they're ready to get stuff off their plate. So if they can delegate, they will very quickly when they find out they're supposed to be in more meetings, and making more decisions. And they don't want to slow the project down also. Doesn't respect your expertise or advice. So this is the thing I'm seeing with a lot of like D6 spaghetti code sites, where maybe it was built with a different vendor and it's all spaghetti code, and they don't want to deal with the reality that there's a bigger issue at hand. So they don't want to upgrade to D7 and start fresh. They don't want to just blow it away and start with something that's not spaghetti code. So they just need the results fast. That's the root cause. So the remedy here, and this is a hard concept sometimes for clients to wrap their brain around, and in general people to wrap their brain around, but it's the concept of technical debt, and talking about how it affects them in the long term, whereas like if we're just pushing through this code right now to get you what you want for tomorrow and not thinking about how we should have been refactoring that code so that we can upgrade your site later or upgrading you now, what's going to happen is you're going to be spending more money, exponentially more money over time on your site, and it's going to take exponentially longer to do the things that you want later. So we should stop now and assess like what the bigger strategy should be at this point. So previous relationship comparison. There are two situations where you might hear about someone that they previously worked with. It could be that they had a really great relationship that they're no longer in and they're comparing you to that vendor. Or it could be that they had a bad relationship, that's what I see more frequently, and they're comparing you to that vendor and trying to prevent a scenario that's happened before. If you have the former situation where they're comparing you to someone who is very successful, there's a reason why they're not working with them anymore, and it's probably because they were kicked to the curb, and you need to figure out what exactly they were doing, because if they're happy, then why aren't they with them, you know? So just probe into what that previous relationship was like and what qualities it had that they liked. And if you can actually contact someone at that agency, go for it and talk to them about it. They might not want to talk about it, though. For the negative situation where they had a bad experience, it's important that you talk to your client about how your process will prevent what happened prior. It's really not fair to you or to your other clients to make special exceptions because of something that happened at a previous relationship. The best thing you can do in this situation is just treat them as you would treat any other client and just reassure them verbally or demonstrate that your process will prevent the problem that they had prior. It's just not fair to make special exceptions for people because of something you weren't involved in. Possessive behavior. So sometimes people get frustrated when, if there's a critical security release and we work on their site or like there's a security issue, so we'd have to do some patching on someone's site and someone else's project falls to the wayside so that we can take care of this critical issue. That's one situation. But so essentially the possessive behavior is that the client wants more attention than you're able to provide without putting your business at risk. So what I do in these situations is I like to walk the client through our business model and explain the kind of commitment I would need from them to offer them 24/7 support. And usually they'll look at what that would cost and decide that they can deal with our process. We're not their employee. We're their vendor. They can't just call us 9 to 5 anytime and expect us to just drop everything and take care of it. We have a process. We need to get it in our resourcing. We need to get it in our workflow. And when it comes to crises, they need to understand that when crises arise for their project, they would like us to hop on their stuff as quickly as possible. But it also means that when crises happen for other people, we are going to hop on those as well, and they might fall to the wayside. It's a two-way street, and they just really need to understand why that's a good thing for them in the end, even though sometimes you get pushed to the wayside. This is the one that I'm most guilty of, actually, dread of communicating information in particular, and omissions of truth. I don't really omit truth, but I dread. I always say I don't want to go to these meetings. And it's usually because I have information that I'm going to say to someone, and I'm afraid of the reaction that they're going to have. And normally it goes fine, but I still just have this anxiety about it. So the root cause, yes, fear of delivering information that could be negatively received. The remedy here is when you're getting ready for these meetings, take a step back and think about the kind of information that you're dreading communicating or that you're trying to not deliver by omitting it. And sometimes it's the client dreads communicating things. That's a lot less frequent. But when you are assessing this, think about why do you think they'll react this way? Have they reacted this way in the past? What do you think is causing it to happen this way? Talk to them about the constraints they're working within that are causing the stress and high tension on their side around this kind of information. Is it, they're grant funded and they don't have any wiggle room if the project goes off the rails a little bit? Do they have a huge product release coming out, so they need it done by a certain date and timeline is very strict? Just talking through it so that you can understand where they're coming from, so that you guys can have a real conversation and not have it be super high strung. And then ask them what you can do from your standpoint to help them be prepared to have these conversations internally with their stakeholders so that it's not high tension for them as well. And this is the last one. So changing your whole process to fit the client. I think most people know that this is a big no-no, but there should be some delta around your process that's acceptable. But there is, like, if you're using your client's VPN and you can't access your other clients' projects, especially as a project manager when you're bouncing between things, it's really frustrating to have someone try to integrate you into their business entirely because you can't run your own process. And there's a reason why you have a process as a business. It's because you do it well and you excel at it, and when you're not using it, then you're probably not going to excel very well. So keep an eye out for patterns. If you notice that multiple people are struggling with something, one of these issues or any other issue, just make sure that you're taking note of it and trying to see what you can do to improve. There's always things that we can do to improve. So that said, you can always take a moment to process, and this is where we get into, he was on the Muppets. He's trying to level set with them. They're too excited. Yeah, it's always a good time to level set, and these are the things that I would do in a situation where I'm trying to improve the relationship. I think it's especially important if you're having relationship troubles with your agency or client to level set even in the midst of launch craziness, because that can actually make or break the launch. Because if you take the time to figure out what wasn't working and how we can make it better, it could actually accelerate your production so that you can hit their deadline. So even if it's a hard thing to do because everyone's so laser focused on getting these tiny details out the door, it's really important to sit down and talk about it. So the way I like to do this is an informal meeting, and it's usually 20 to 30 minutes. If it's in person, that's great. I know a lot of people have a lot of remote clients, but just no slides, no presentation, no nothing. And if you can get coffee with them if they're local, that'd be even better. Just explain where you're coming from and why you want to have this meeting. The thing that I typically would say is I want to make sure that we're collaborating in a way that's best for the project and your long-term goals. And then ask them what's working, what's not. There's a lot of just getting feedback. And for what's not working, what about it is causing them pain on their end? Sometimes what's causing them pain is that they don't have the budget to get more of your time. So the best thing you can do in that case is give them the most bang for their buck as you're physically able to do, physically, figuratively able to do. But ultimately that comes back down to your value, and that's why you have the rate that you have. Ask them again what they need to be successful on their side and how you can help them be successful on their end. This can manifest in any number of ways. The ways that I've seen happen, they just need to send a report out so everybody can see that stuff is happening. Do they need a dog and pony show for their stakeholders? Do you need to give a demo and do one of these? Or do they just need the project to be delivered on time and to scope and budget? Just talk with them, keep it really light, low-key, see what we can do to work better with each other. And actually listen. I know it's easy to say, you set up the meeting and you go and you kind of talk and things come in your head, but you don't actually change anything. Actually take it under wing and make those changes. It's not just a meeting for show and just sort of it's like extending an alms. But it's an opportunity to receive constructive feedback. So the next thing I would do, and this can be a part of this meeting, is reiterate the roles and responsibilities on the project. And I think perhaps what can be the most confusing for the client is what the role of the Drupal agency is. They sort of just you build my website, or you do this. They don't get any further down in that. They don't understand that maybe we've only been contracted to do site building and not custom development. They don't understand that the larger Drupal community is working on things that they produce security updates and module updates, and you're going to want those in your site. And they don't understand how that whole ecosystem works. They just like do it. So just explain, what were we asked to do? Were we asked to do config? Were we asked to do custom development? Were we asked to do theming? There's definitely gray areas, but for the most part, you can usually boil it down to one of those three or more than one of those three for those conversations. And then explain in that context what that means you can do for them. So there might be something they're asking for that seems very standard or simple or easy. I hear that a lot, or quick. But it's actually not, because it requires custom development or it requires extra theming time, and that's just not something that was in the scope. So just explaining to them it's not that we can't do it, it's that we can do it, but that's not what we agreed to do here. Then clarify also what was actually purchased. So did they buy your time or did they buy deliverables? Sometimes it gets a little muddy. There might be like a scope that says what we're trying to do in the amount of time that we've purchased, and they mistake that for being we are getting these and it's going to cost this much time. So just explaining the contract that you've signed with them and talking about what it means you're actually delivering. And then the last thing, I kind of touched on this already, is just how the Drupal updates and larger Drupal community fit into their project. So when there are releases, they have the notice will come up on their site with the red X, and people get scared and they're like, what's happening? But just explaining how that ecosystem works. So like there are critical security updates, and there are ones that we can do like while we're doing other work. So we kind of let them hang out for a second. But it's just sort of trying to clarify to them what this open source code flow looks like with regard to what they're trying to do. So review your communication strategy and realign expectations. So it's always good to talk about talking about things. So how quickly can your clients expect a response from you? At chapter 3, we outline in our contracts for support like the bare minimum of when we'll get back to you, and I always exceed it. And sometimes what'll happen is it'll instigate sort of a feedback loop where if I don't get back to them as fast as I've been getting back to them, they get angry that I've been overachieving. So I try when I get a new support client or a new support contract to remind them or let them know that like, hey, there's a bare minimum in here, but like I want to get to your stuff as fast as I can, but I also shouldn't be chastised for not getting back to you. I don't want to delay giving you a response just because that's what the bare minimum is. I'm going to get to you as soon as I can. And that way you can exceed their expectations for communication and not feel pressured to maintain a higher standard. Another thing to go over is if you're using a project management tool, who is responsible for entering the tickets, what information is required on a ticket before it can be slated for production, what is the ticket workflow, what are the stages it goes through, does it go from submission to development to internal QA to UAT to deployment, just making sure they understand the process, because there's sometimes a lot of steps and they don't realize, they're just like, do it, it's done. Talk about how often you are going to review the budget and timing and timeline. So do you touch base on budget at 50%, again at 25, at 10, and at 5? Do you touch it at the end of the project, at the end of each feature, at every status meeting? How often do you need to talk about it? And then set expectations around resourcing. How often does resourcing happen in your organization? Do you resource every week? Do you resource as needed as requests come in? Just sort of setting expectations for when they know they can get a response of when you're going to start working on their stuff. So these are strategies for dealing with inevitable conflict between what your client is asking for and what your agency is able to do. As project managers, and sometimes as account managers, depending on what kind of structure you guys have, you're stuck in a position where you want to advocate for the client because you want to keep them on as a client, but at the same time, they're asking for something that your agency is not okay with doing. So there are a few things that I end up doing to advocate for my client when I think they deserve to be advocated for. I mean, they always deserve, but when they should be advocated for, and there are things that I do to advocate for my agency when I feel like our priorities need to be heard as well. So you don't want to just be like stomped on either side. So being a good client advocate means that you're willing to dig into the client's reasoning for what they think is the root of the problem, rather than just being like, I need a slideshow or I need a map. Like, give me that map. And just asking them what that's going to help them with in their business goals. Talking about the goals and the needs of the business rather than the desirable features and functionality. Another thing that I do to stick up for my clients is explain why timelines I give them are squishy, and that no one should latch onto dates. So instead of telling someone like, yes, based on the numbers I've calculated, it'll be October 16th when you'll get your website, I try to tell them mid to late October, maybe early November, and I explain to them why they should want this answer themselves, because if you can take an extra day or two to make the project extra great and it's not looking late because it's still mid or late October, you should go for it because it's what's best for them. It's going to make them look better in the long run. Helping them determine what their actual priorities are is another thing you can do, and this is the big project management triangle that everybody loves, talking about what comes first. Is it your budget? Is that the most important? Is it your timeline? Is it your features? And this, if you've done the strategy process as a part of the scope that you're working on, this will go back to the site goals that were established at that time. Those may have changed. It's a good time to revisit them. Another thing I do to stick up for my clients is I'll call out when there's a less robust solution that may meet their needs when they change their viewpoint a little bit. They might be asking for something very elaborate, and if they just alter their thought process about how that problem could be solved or what problem we're trying to solve, they could save a lot of money and time. So just keeping a keen eye out for over or under engineering when planning implementations with your dev team. Another big one is watching out for, in the design and strategy process, watching out for demands that clients won't be able to sustain. So this could be sourcing images and content. Like you might get a really image-heavy blog listing, and they can't source any of those images. So they just end up having an icon or some default thing, and it just looks kind of garbagey. So just calling out like, hey, do you have someone on staff who can do that? Do you have a budget to source images? Because you want to make sure that it looks good for them, but you don't want to make them agree to do something they don't have the resources to do. The one that I do the most is in our resourcing meetings at our agency is I throw down to advocate for my clients. So like if my client has a timeline coming up, I am ready to duke it out with the other PMs there and explain why my project needs to be on the docket now, explaining what happens if my project doesn't get resourced and how that affects our relationship with them and our overall business, because they could walk away and then we have to find more production time to fill. So just being ready, duking it out. It gets a little ugly, but it's all for the client. Another thing I can do to stick up for the clients is letting them know with ample time when their budget is getting close to depletion so they can continue having us work without stoppages. Sometimes what happens is, there's a little bit of push and pull here because you have to understand what the process it is that your client goes through to renew their contract. I have some people where I can let them know 2 weeks in advance, like, hey, you're going to be out in 2 weeks. Should I get you another contract? But there are other organizations where I have to let them know like 6 to 8 weeks in advance because they have to go through a whole rigmarole to get something signed. So that's just out of respect for them. So ensuring that decisions are heard and respected throughout the team. So when the client makes a decision based on the trade-offs we gave them or the recommendations we gave them, and maybe it's not the one that we recommended, making sure that everybody's on board and agreeing that, hey, maybe that wasn't what we recommended, but this is why they chose it, and let's go for it and not be grumpy about it. So another one is clients wanting direct communication with developers. And this is a hot one for some people because they think it's okay. But what I've told clients in the past is you can talk directly with my developer, but if you ask them to do anything and I don't talk to them for 4 hours, you may have lost X number of dollars, and that's where your budget is going. So I can't really manage your budget if you're talking directly with a developer. Even if we're all in the same chat room, I might be busy. Another thing you can do to stick up for your client is to be flexible and accommodating. Just make sure that any changes are documented in some written manner, whether it's an email. It doesn't have to be super official, but just making sure that anything that was changed from the original plan is written down so you know exactly when it occurred. And then the last one is showing them that you understand where they're coming from. Communicate back to your client what you're doing for them internally. So if you're throwing down in your resource meetings, let them know, like, hey, I got really heated for you. Like, I really wanted to make sure that we got you what you needed. Like, someone else is waiting now because I was advocating for you. They just might not be aware of what you're doing for them. It's really hard especially when you're remote, they don't know exactly what's going on necessarily. So sticking up for your agency, this one's more intuitive, I think, because you work for them and they pay your bills. But the best thing you can do is know your scope inside and out, and just don't let things get squeezed in, at least not without budget allowance or documentation. Another thing you can do is roll up your sleeves and help your teammates. So this might mean like helping content entry move along if they're getting close to the deadline, just hopping in and helping out with loading things up, doing something kind of mundane, helping with QA, getting people sandwiches if they're trying to work through some stuff. Just generally trying to get involved. I think everyone's familiar with the image where there's the leader at the front of the thing pulling and the leader at the back. Leaders are pulling at the front, they're not giving orders from the back. Another thing you can do to stick up for your team is to take the hit for them so that they can continue working. As a project manager, maybe there's something that went awry, but I will try to communicate on behalf of whoever had the error. I will try to take the hit for that so that they can continue doing their production work. Another one is don't let your clients push you into unreasonable timelines. Sometimes you sign a contract and then they delay, and then they're like, hey, it's due in 2 weeks. And it just doesn't make any sense. I always tell them, just look at the numbers in your contract for how much time we need to build this, and think about how many hours are between now and your deadline and how much greater that is. So just not letting them push you around. Another thing you can do is perform retrospectives with your team internally in a safe environment without the client, so that everybody can sort of vent and get everything off their chest, and then talk about how we could have prevented it or do something differently to make it better. This one doesn't happen very often, but it's important that I call it out, is firing a bad fit. So if there's a client that just is not a good fit, and it's really impossible to work with them, and they're not willing to make the changes on their side to help come meet you halfway, it's the best thing you can do is let them go. So what I tend to say is, it doesn't seem like it's working out, like, I'll end the contract, you can have whatever code we've developed. We'll just walk away, and it's fine. And the other thing is complimenting and just appreciating your entire project team at your agency, letting them know that you really appreciate everything that they're doing great work. Just say thank you, and say thank you in front of the client too. If they come to any meetings, let them know that to the client how awesome the people you work with are. This is short, but it kind of been brought up a couple times, but everybody's a special snowflake. I think everybody knows that. Everyone's different strokes for different folks, as he says. And then over time, projects change. It's just the way life is. Projects can go from pre-launch into support, so there's more ad hoc requests going on, and you're not giving them 100% of your attention to get them launched. So just sort of letting them know what they should expect at that phase and when things are changing. Another way it can change is completely new people come into the picture, people leave. I'm actually working on a project right now where not a single person was involved in the original scope is still present. It's daunting, and we have no idea why any of those decisions were made, and it makes no sense. But so when that happens, if you're a part of it, when players change, take the time to talk to, whether it's on your team or on the other team, sit down, say like, hey, this is where we've been to date. This is where we're trying to go. This is like where we've had some pain points in the past. It's just another great opportunity to level set. Just sit everyone down and say, hey, like, welcome, Jim. This is how we've been doing it so far. Do you have any ideas of how we could do this better because you're coming in with fresh eyes? And then strategies change. So this I've seen, because I work in San Francisco, we work with businesses, startups, and they are constantly changing every day what they feel like they should be doing and how they should be running their business. And so business priorities will change, and that's fine. Just be sure to remind your client of the decisions they made in the past, why they were made. And if the reasons for that decision are no longer valid, there's really no problem. Just letting them know, like, hey, just so you know, you flip-flopped, and like you want to pay attention to that because that's kind of wasteful. But like maybe they actually need to. But if the reasons for the decision that they made prior are still valid, assess why that request is being made now and why they feel differently than they did before, and how you can accommodate their underlying desires. So success begins at the first point of contact. The projects I've worked on that have had the greatest success are ones that have been started on really great foundations. They've been sold correctly in terms of scope, budget, and timeline, with expectations around communication set properly, expectations about how the delivery process works. Sometimes when you're in a fast sales cycle, it's hard to cover all these things accurately, but the ones that have turned out the best for me have had a great foundation. Oh, it's almost done. But yeah, so just get the expectations right at the beginning and you've won half the battle. So that's sort of the overview, but just remember that we're all humans, so we all have full personalities and everything, and you might just be seeing one side of someone. So just be yourself. Talk about everything openly. I'm an over-communicator. I don't think it's ever really that terrible. Some people may feel differently, but it's really good to talk about it. It's also great that they're letting me talk about this here, because I think we don't do a lot of interagency talking about this. And then party like it's 1999. Hang out with your coworkers and with your clients and have fun. Yeah, so thank you. You guys have any questions? Yeah.
So you touched on effective communication around when you're building software that replaces someone's job. How can you maybe give us an example of how that goes down? Because sometimes those people are on the team and they start dragging their feet, and it's a mess because they see it coming and nobody told them.
The way that I like to address that is I'll talk with that person's superior, and I'll frame up the issue, because the person who's their superior might not actually realize that it's affecting this person in this way, and then talk about what new responsibilities they could take on, and talk about what this means for their job description and what their plan is for them. Because most of the time, I think the client or the superior has not realized that what they're trying to do is actually putting someone's job in jeopardy. Or if they do realize, and it's intentional, for them to deal with that before we work on the project, or at least that person should not be involved in the project at all. So they might be doing it because they want to let that person go, which is really sad. So, yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Can you share tips on the best ways to do a grant-funded fixed bid contract? Like, what are the keys to success for getting through a grant-funded?
Yeah. It's just really important that we stick to plan. And it's really important that they understand what exactly was purchased, because it's easy to make requests and it's not easy to acquiesce them. In terms of staying on timeline, as long as the timeline that was proposed in the original RFP is sufficient with the budget that's allowed, just making sure that you are scheduling enough resourcing and production hours to get you to that deadline. Calculating it out, like there might be some resource overlap where you have two people at the same time, but it's extremely frustrating when you get a project that's sold that you just literally don't have enough production hours before. And then talking about strategies for how you can, if there's any flexibility around that timeline. Anybody else?
So how early as a project manager, do you get involved in the sales process? So does the salesperson line up the contract and sign and now welcome to your project manager, or do you get involved in defining that scope during the sales process at all?
I've done both. Currently, I am not involved at all in the sales process. I've done a lot of sales cycle stuff in the past, and it helps, but I don't think for the level of effort that was required. It depends on your sales engineer as well and how knowledgeable they are about what goes on in the project. I'm pretty fortunate right now that the person he's been doing this for over a decade, so he knows everything inside and out. But yeah, I've found that it's not worth the level of effort if you can, because it's just like setting expectations. I don't know. You were there. You remember when I was involved in the sales process. Yeah, it was probably not worth the level of effort, I guess, is what I'm saying. Anything else?
I think, one thing that I've found challenging is when you're play like in a fixed bid sort of thing, and the scope is based on, like, here's the features we're going to have on the site, and maybe you have wireframes, but like the designs aren't done, but then the comps come in, and it's like, until you really start digging into them, it's like, whoa, that is way more complicated than we initially expected, and yet that's the scope that was agreed to. We will do these things,
right?
And, I don't know.
Yeah, I think what I've done in those previous situations explained ways that we know that we can accomplish that feature that are simpler, that maybe don't align to the comps, and that would mean that they would have to be okay with some deviation from that. And if they're not okay with deviating from it, they should get a change request, because what we planned a standard implementation in that case, and they're asking for a non-standard one. And that's a risk that comes in when you work with design firms that don't know Drupal, because they don't know what standard and non-standard is. But that's the risk they took on by not doing strategy with your firm, or involving you in the strategy process at the least, whether they were aware of it or not. Anybody else? Cool. Sure.
Do you have any experience doing agency to agency with a mutual client project management?
Yeah.
We wind up doing that a lot, and I'd love to hear your experience and tips.
Yeah. So the ones that I've done most frequently have been where we work with another design team. And it's actually, the ones that we found to be most successful are where it's a brand agency and they know the client's brand inside and out. Because as a Drupal agency, if we come in and try to do their design and branding, we're only touching it for like a tiny minute. And we can get to know them and we can do it sufficiently. But these people who have been maybe contracted with them for 10 to 12 years are going to have a much better opinion on how things should look. So we just try to play to everyone's strengths and do what we do best and help them to do what they do best so that we can provide the most value to the client. I don't know if that's an acceptable answer, but
it's a tough question, so I don't know if there's like a really easy, quick answer.
Yeah, it's usually, there's conflict when there's toe stepping, for sure. So I try to set up the roles and responsibilities. I mean, like, there's no like checklist or anything, but just making sure everybody's clear on what we've been asked to do, so that if we do need to do some toe stepping, that we can work out who's going to do what when, so that we can alleviate it as much as possible.
I think it seems like you kind of doubles or 1.5 times the amount of meetings that you wind up having. Because you have like project managers or agencies to get together to make sure you're on the same page. You have like a unified like presentation of the mutual clients. It's just that extra meeting overhead is just inevitable. I don't know.
I try to have everybody, like the whole project team in every meeting, not developers, but like I want to make sure that one from each party is represented in every meeting so that you don't have to repeat information. But there is occasionally times where like we'll need to talk with the designer offline to make sure that we have the right information. Yeah, it's the more people you involve, the more time it takes. Like that's just a fundamental rule. Yeah.
What are your recommendations regarding the revision process and talking to your client about how many revisions they get and how they need to provide you feedback?
So I tell them what's average, and then if we exceed the average, that was not necessarily what we had. We sell the average for revisions, right? And if you exceed it, then we need more time. You're kind of a special snowflake. We should get more time to do it, because you don't want to stop. You don't have to stop halfway through a rush. That's how I do it. Yeah.
So it seems like a lot of this that you've been talking about today is about navigating difficult conversations with clients. And I would just be interested in hearing your opinion on whether you think that speaks to a larger industry issue on the way that projects are sold, and maybe there's like a problem here that can be looked at, or is that in fact mean that the project is healthy and that there's these checkpoints in which you continually have to wrangle the situation and keep the client in check?
A little of both. I think the sales process is inherently difficult because you're selling to people who aren't experts in the area for the most part. So they don't know exactly what they're buying when they buy it as much as you explain it. And you can explain away, but it doesn't really matter. But I do think pain points are natural, and I think that having checkpoints is a sign of a healthy relationship. Because, I mean, it's the same thing like in your personal relationships. Like if you have a spouse or something, like it's not always like smooth sailing 100% of the time. So, but if you guys can talk about why it's not and make course changes to adjust, then you're going to be okay in the long run. Yeah. A lot of it was very reminiscent of like all the things that are like coming to mind. I was like, I should have just read 17 magazine and just like gave you all a copy. Or you guys can just listen to Prince. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Well, I'll be up here, so if you guys want to come chat, I'm here. Cool. Thank you.
What's up? Okay.